Out, where they go around and they inspire students to pursue STEM careers as well. And we're going to find out a little bit about his passion with math. So he really focuses on the M in STEM. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Lieutenant Colonel Dwayne Digger Carey.
Thanks, Slade.
Thank you.
Thanks for having my wife and I here this morning at the studios here at the Discovery Center in Colorado Springs. And I noticed that, Slade, we're talking with a lot of Colorado Springs area kids today. So I'd like to take just a minute and give a shout out for the Discovery Center. I know that a lot of y'all have been to the Discovery Center here at Space Foundation headquarters. And if you've been here, you want to come back. And if you haven't been here, you really need to come down sometime and check out the Discovery Center. I mean, it's a wonderful resource here in Colorado Springs, and they got some of the coolest space stuff. Slade and I were walking around this morning around some of the exhibits on the floor just so we could get pumped up this morning to talk to you guys about space. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
All right. So we have a lot of predetermined questions from a lot of the students in your various schools, and we will get to those and pepper those in throughout this conversation. We also have allotted some time to do some quiz time, so we're going to test your knowledge, so listen carefully, students, okay? All right, so, Digger, describe your childhood. What challenges did you face?
Well, Slade, I would say, probably the main challenge I faced as a kid was that we had a kind of a difficult home situation. My mom was 16 years old when she had me, and she was going to a Catholic school back in those days, so they kicked her out of school as soon as it became evident that she was pregnant. Yeah, it didn't go over real well at a Catholic school. And by the time my mom was 21 years old, actually my dad ran off, and she was alone with 3 kids, 21 years old with 8th grade education. So we didn't have a lot of money. And we lived in those days up in St. Paul, Minnesota. We lived in the projects and didn't have a lot of money. My mom was working during the day as a beautician. She was a hairdresser. So we were kind of being raised by babysitters, and the sad thing is that I was allowed to kind of run wild, and I didn't take school real serious back in those days. I kind of didn't like school. And I used to skip out of school a lot, and my grades were terrible, and I just didn't get it. I didn't understand the importance of school, and I made a lot of mistakes during my school career that I would have to pay dearly for later in my life, and we can go into that later. But the main challenge, I think, was probably economic.
Where did you grow up?
Grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I know that we're talking to kids that know where Minnesota is and all that, but what I can tell you about Minnesota is that Minnesota is a state that has even colder winters and more snow than Colorado Springs has. And if you want to get an idea of how much I didn't want to go to school, when I was in 1st and 2nd grade, I actually skipped out of school or was late for school about 60 times. And I'd hide out in the woods during the day instead of go to school. And it was just not the way to have a good attitude about school.
Do you regret that?
Well, I regretted it really bad later on in my life when I suddenly decided that I had some high goals in life and I wasn't prepared to achieve those goals. We can talk about that a little bit later on.
We certainly can. Well, we have a student question here, actually, and this is from Sunrise Elementary. Miss Bones class, or Miss Bond's class, I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the question is this, Digger. Was your family supportive of you going into space?
That was from Mountainside?
That was from Sunrise Elementary.
Sunrise. Good morning, Sunrise. How y'all doing? I was looking forward to speaking to your school this morning. Yeah, my family was very supportive. My wife is here. My 2 kids, I think I had a kid in middle school and one of my kids was in high school. And they were very supportive, and that's how it was when Cheryl and I were raising our family. Is we all realized that we had Cheryl and I, and we had 2 kids, and we realized in our family that we had to be supportive of everybody's goals and endeavors. And when Dad had a chance to fly in space, my wife Cheryl was very supportive and helpful, and my kids were really into it too. My kids used to help me study up for my space mission.
Oh, that's
so, and I think it was fun for them to give a lesson to Dad about space. So
Wow.
it was a family endeavor, and we had a good time with it.
That's great. That's good to hear.
Thanks, Sunrise, for that question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Also, we have another student question from Widefield Elementary of the Arts, Miss Cassidy Lanigan and Catches classes. Here's the question. What was it like being away from your family, and how did you communicate with them when you were in space?
Wow, that's such an interesting question. Did you say that was from Widefield?
Yes, I did.
Good morning, Widefield. I don't know if I've been to your school or not, but anyways, it's good to have you here. Actually, what I should do, and she won't do this, but what I should do is get my wife here in front of the camera to tell that story. But the way NASA used to run the space shuttle program, and I'm sure I'm going to get some details wrong because this is her.
This is how this is going to work. I'm going to ask you guys a question, and you're going to have to recall via memory, and the answer. So you'll get 15 seconds. Here is the question. Where was Digger born and raised? Go. 15 seconds.
Come on, you guys, that's an easy one.
You got it. Okay, and we're back. Now, if you guys answered St. Paul, Minneapolis, you're correct. Way to go, guys. Nice job on that one. Yay! All right, so we have actually another question for you, Digger. This is a student question from Sunrise Elementary, again. Miss Christensen's class. Here's the question. Why did you join the Air Force?
Why did I join the Air Force? Well, Slade, these days, when I was growing up, people would actually be forced to go into the military via a program we used to call the draft. But by the time I was old enough to graduate from high school, Congress passed some laws and actually made it voluntary if you wanted to be in the United States military or not. And I was different from a lot of kids that graduated from high school. I really didn't have a plan. So what I did was I knew I liked to ride motorcycles, and I spent a couple years riding motorcycles and hitchhiking and jumping trains and doing that kind of thing to travel around the country. And after several years of doing that, I actually fell in love with America, but more than that, I fell in love with the people of America. The people of America, of the United States, are the greatest people you're ever going to meet in the whole world. And Cheryl and I have been all over the world, and people all over the world are wonderful. But people in America are really, really special. And after a couple of years of doing that, I almost felt an obligation to pay back to America and the American people by serving them in the best way that I could. And I decided probably the best way to do that was to join the military. And if I was going to be in the military, I thought it would be cool to fly fighter jets. So that's why, the initial reason why I joined the Air Force.
Nice. I'd like to hear more about your tales from when you rode across the country and took a couple years off. And you must have experienced a lot of amazing moments. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
All right, so another question here. What were some obstacles you had to overcome?
How interesting. I'm not sure which school that question came from, but I would like to give a shout out to Pinello, if you're out there this morning, and good morning, you guys. It's great to have you. The main challenge I had to overcome, Slade, to be a fighter pilot was I found out that in order to be a fighter pilot, get this, I already told the kids that I didn't like school, and I told the kids I didn't take school real seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't tell the kids that I slept through a lot of my math classes because I figured I was never going to need that stuff. Guess what, Slade? When I decided I wanted to become a fighter pilot, I discovered that I had to go to 4 years of college, and I had to have a college degree to be a fighter pilot. Now, let me just ask the smart kids that are out there, do you really think I was ready for college? Now, I realize that not all kids are going to go to college. As a matter of fact, if you look around in your classroom, probably about half of y'all are going to go to college, and then the rest of you should get some type of a skill, technical skill or something like that. You know, your education doesn't end just because you're done with 12th grade. There's more to come after that. But for those of you that decide to go to college, you're probably aware that in order to go to college, you probably need to pay attention at your classes in school, and I had never done that. And I told you that I made a mistake, and I paid for it dearly. Now imagine how that felt when I finally decided what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, so I had to go to college to do that. But I wasn't ready. And you know what that meant? That meant that of all the kids I went to college with, I had to work about 4 times as hard as they had to. Now, if you go to college, yeah, it's important to work hard in your studies and all that kind of stuff, but college can be a fun experience for kids. I didn't have a lot of fun in college because I was so far behind academically that I had to work and study 4 times as hard as the other kids. So that's what I'm saying. I made a mistake in my K through 12 career. I should have worked harder. I should have paid attention in those math classes and those science classes, English, all that stuff is important. And I had to do all that when it was time to go to college. I made it really hard on myself. It was a mistake. And one of the things I like to share with kids is, you're looking at a dude that made a lot of mistakes. Please don't make those same mistakes. I'm here to tell you that there's a better way to do it. And some of you may be getting some ideas about what you want to do in the future. And Slade, we'll talk a little bit later about what the elementary school kids and the middle school kids that are with us this morning, there's one thing they can do in particular to make their lives a lot more enjoyable, because it will allow them to reach the goals that they want to reach in life. There's one simple thing you can do in school, and we'll talk about that later.
Thanks. That sounds like it's going to be some great advice, and thanks for sharing that, Digger. Another question: what decisions or goals did you have to make that changed your life?
One of the main decisions I had to make that changed the trajectory of my life was when I decided I wanted to be a fighter pilot. There were things that I had to do. There were things I had to do that I didn't want to do. That because I didn't like school, the idea of going to college was not real attractive to me. But I had to do that in order to reach my goal of being a fighter pilot. And with the help of Miss Cheryl, my wife, we were together at that point, we decided that in order to become a fighter pilot and to make this dream come true, that we had to do the difficult thing. There's a lot easier things we could have done in life, but we had to do the difficult thing to make our dreams come true. But it was worth the effort, and it was worth the sacrifice, because my career as an Air Force fighter pilot, test pilot, astronaut has been incredibly fulfilling and a lot of fun, very meaningful. But it's because we had to do the difficult thing and do some things we didn't want to do in order to get to the good part. So I would say one of the seminal important decisions of my life was you gotta suck it up, and you gotta swallow it, and you gotta go to college. You gotta do this in order to make the dream come true. I think a lot of kids out there are gonna discover that, you know, whatever your goals are, you want to be a teacher, you want to be the world's best mom, you want to be a doctor, lawyer, president, fighter pilot, whatever, those kinds of things, that in order to be really, really good at what you're going to do, you're going to have to do some things that you really don't want to do, but you do them because they're going to make you more awesome at whatever it is that you decide to do.
That sounds amazing. And with the decision comes the other part of that, right, which is the setting of the goals. Talk a little bit about that. You know, when you made these decisions, did that inherently and automatically just make you realize that you had to set these goals for yourself?
Yeah, you know, Slade, I wish I would have been that smart. You know, a lot of the things, Cheryl and I go to schools all over the world, and a lot of the experiences and advice that we share with kids, these are not things that my teachers told me, my parents told me. These are things that Cheryl and I have discovered the hard way by making tons of mistakes and finally figuring out what works for us. So the advice that I give and the experiences I share are hard-won. They're not anything you're going to be told by anybody or anything that I was told by anybody, but I just had to learn it. Now, when I finally decided to set the goal of becoming an astronaut, I was already in the Air Force, and I was learning how to fly my first fighter jet, which was an A-10. And when I was in A-10 school in the Air Force, I remember we were living in a motel room, and one night I sat down and in a little notebook that I had, and I've still got, I spelled out my goals that I would like to someday fly in space, be a space shuttle pilot or something like that. And then I stumbled upon a series of steps that we can all go through to make our dreams come true. And this is actually a half-hour lecture, but I'm going to boil it down to 2 minutes, and I call it Digger's Rules for Achieving Impossible Goals. And this first step is to come up with something you'd really like to do, and then you got to write it down. And I understand that not a lot of kids write stuff down anymore, but write it down on paper. It's a more powerful way of preserving the thought than putting it on your computer or putting it on your phone or something. Write it down on paper and then save that paper. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is now you have to realize, you have to figure out what steps you have to go through to get to that goal. And this is kind of the hard part. This is where you have to do some study and find out what the rules are. I discovered that the rules to be an astronaut are that you have to be a pilot, and you have to have 1,000 hours of first pilot time, and it's probably impossible to be a pilot astronaut if you haven't gone to test pilot school in the military. And so those were some of the rules that NASA laid out about what it takes to become an astronaut. That's step 2. Step number 3 is to then take your goal and modify and sharpen your goal. In other words, someone may have a goal of being a fighter pilot. I want to be the best. I want to be such a good fighter pilot that I get to be a test pilot and an astronaut. Someone decides they want to be a teacher. You have to decide you want to be the teacher that's so awesome that when President Trump gives his State of the Union speech, you are right up there in the front row, and he calls you out during his speech. That's how awesome of a teacher you are. If you want to be a doctor, you're the one that discovers a cure for 8 different kinds of cancer. In other words, make the goal impossible. Make the goal so high that it's impossible. I'll talk about the importance of that here in a minute. Then comes the actual execution of working toward the goal. You've laid down the steps. You start performing the steps one by one. You're going to find that throughout your career and throughout your life, as you're working toward the impossible goal, you're making some major decisions. And here's kind of one of the hard things about achieving the impossible goal. Anytime you make a decision, a major career decision, there's going to be one path which involves more money, more comfort, maybe staying in the town you really like or something like that. And then there's going to be the other path where there's discomfort, uncertainty. Unfortunately, it seems like to get to the impossible goal, you have to take that hard path, and that's what gets you closer. You got to commit to that and do the hard thing to get you closer to your goal. Another step is you tell everybody about your goal. It's an impossible goal, and most people are going to laugh at you because it's impossible. How dare a kid that grew up in the projects think that he is going to be an astronaut? That's ludicrous.
Or she.
That's impossible. No, I'm talking about myself in particular, but in general. So that's when you share your impossible goal. You share it with your friends. You share it with your enemies. You share it with your boss. You share it with your subordinates. You share it with your teachers, brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, everybody. Let them laugh. That will steel your resolve and give you the power inside to do the difficult things that it takes to get you to the goal. Then the last step, and the step that's the most curious. Slade, if you've worked hard and you've stayed on the plan that you laid out all those years ago, you're going to find yourself in a position in life where you love where you are and you love what you're doing. You will then, if you're lucky, be given an opportunity to take that last step and achieve the impossible goal. And you might not want to do it. You know why? It's because you're having such a great time in life and you're working with such incredible, wonderful people, and you're fulfilling the passion that has driven you throughout all those years. The paradox of the impossible goal is when you actually get on the threshold of achieving it, you almost could care less whether you get there or not, because the journey of working toward that has put you in a wonderful place. But you owe it to that teenager or that young person that set that impossible goal to take the last step and then go ahead and do it. And if you get to a spot in life where the impossible goal will never come true, you can still hold your head high because, after all, it was impossible. But just the act of trying to get there, you're going to find yourself in a wonderful place. And then I took longer than 2 minutes. But those are Digger's goals to achieving difficult and impossible goals.
That was pretty powerful stuff, and I thank you for sharing that. That was amazing to hear. Okay, I've got a question for you. How did the military influence your life?
Great question. I wonder if that question came from Webster. Webster, are you out there? Morning, dudes. Thanks for sharing the morning with us and some of your valuable class time. Some of the things I learned from the military, I would say the number one thing that Cheryl and I learned, even though I was the service member, my wife Cheryl was in the Air Force, and she committed every bit as much of her career to the Air Force as I did. Slade, the number one thing most of us get from military service is we learn how good it feels, how wonderful it feels to live a life of service, to live a life where you're serving more than just yourself. Now, it's important to serve yourself, it's important to serve your family, but the true joy in life comes from serving something greater than yourself and your immediate family, your community, your state, your country. I'm an astronaut. I like to think that Cheryl and I are serving the entire world because I've seen the world. I've seen how small it is. I feel like what we're doing serves all of humanity, and that feels wonderful. And after 22 and a half years in the military, when it was finally time for Miss Cheryl and I to get out of the military, we could not escape the wonderful feeling we had of service, and that's why we're doing what we do now, which is go all over the school, all over the world, and talk to kids all over the world and get them pumped up about this one secret that I'm going to share with you guys that can help you make your dreams come true. So the number one thing I got from the military was a love of service.
That's great. What did you do in the Air Force?
Well, I was a fighter pilot, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and I couldn't believe when my dreams were coming true to be a fighter pilot. I flew the A-10. Some of you all might be familiar with the A-10. Then after that, I flew F-16s. And after that, because of my education, I had a chance to fly. Look, Slade, there's the A-10 right back there.
Beautiful.
Isn't that cool? I love flying that thing. Then I flew F-16s, actually did some combat time. I had the opportunity because of my education to be a test pilot. And then I spent the last 8.5 years of my military career in NASA, flying the space shuttle and doing space shuttle stuff. Now, I would like to, I already promised these guys I'd share with them a secret to making their dreams come true. Now, here's the funny thing about what you're learning in school. When I look back on my elementary school days, and I'm talking about elementary school, and by the way, Benettucci and French, if you guys are out there, good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning.
We're about to hear from French.
Good. I'm glad to have you guys here with us this morning. Now, I learned as I was going throughout my military career that there was always a lot of new things to learn. I was flying fighters, but they kept making improvements and there were new systems to learn. And I started to realize that the most important thing that I could possibly learn in school that would help me throughout the rest of my life was how to learn. And I know that sounds ridiculous. Kids ask me, they go, Digger, what's the most important thing I could learn in school if I want to be a doctor, lawyer, astronaut, mom, dad, any of those things? And I was telling them the same thing. It's the best thing you can learn in school is learn how to learn. How do you do that? When I look back on my school days, I realized that there was everything I needed to know about life I learned in school. And all the subjects were important. But I discovered when I was in college there was something I was really, really poor at and had to work double hard at. And that was my math classes. And then I discovered that it was a very interesting thing. I didn't do much math as an astronaut, but did you know that math does something magic to your brain? It turns your brain into a more effective learning machine. Now there's other things that can do that, but math is one cool way to do that. You don't have to like math. I never liked it. But just struggling and working hard at math and even getting the wrong answer if you worked really, really hard actually helps to change your brain into a lean, mean learning machine. And that's the important thing about math, and that's the secret. We work hard at all of our school subjects, all of them, but we work 2 times as hard in math. And why is that? Astronauts don't have to use math much. Fighter pilots don't have to use math much, but we have to learn new things and we have to learn them quickly. All astronauts I know, Slade, all astronauts I know have worked hard at math. I didn't tell you that they were all good at math. I told you they worked hard at math. and that's the secret I'd like to share with you guys. Don't think I've given a shout out yet to Widefield and Fountain. Did we give a shout out to Mountainside? I'm not sure. But anyways, good morning to y'all. And Fountain in particular, middle school, my favorite schools to go to are middle school. I'd really like to come out and talk to you guys in person someday. Thanks for being here.
Very good. I've got a student question from French Elementary, Miss Davenport's class. I know you talked about your path to become an astronaut, but what made you want to become an astronaut?
Well, you know, Slade, when I was younger, like when I was a teenager, I started to read a lot of science fiction stories and stuff like that. I've never been a big fan of science fiction movies.
Okay.
Because I always felt like they were kind of fakey and stuff like that. But the good old-fashioned science fiction that has a lot of science in it, I kind of fell in love with the idea of maybe going to space someday and how cool it would be. And then, like I say, as I got into my Air Force career, I started to realize that being a fighter pilot and having an education in engineering, it actually gave me an opportunity to chase that goal of being an astronaut, and that's when I laid out my goals. But initially, I thought it would be cool to be an astronaut because it would be fun. Then as I got older and I became a test pilot and all that, it's a funny thing, Slade, when I talked about the feeling of service in the military, I almost felt like that with all this experience and education that I was getting in the United States military and the Air Force, that I was getting skills that astronauts need, and I almost felt obligated to use those skills in the space program and participate in mankind's exploration of our universe and our solar system. So at the beginning it was fun, I was looking forward to, but as I got older and more mature, it was an obligation and a feeling of service. But it was still a lot of fun, I can tell you that.
Oh, that's great. Quiz time, guys. So we're going to give you 15 seconds again. This is the question. Name one of the aircrafts that Digger flew during his 22 plus years of service. Ready, go. You think they'll get it, Digger?
I think the Pinello kids might get it. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, let's find out what they said. So, if you said either the A-10, you're correct, or the F-16, you would also be correct. Nice job. Way to go, guys.
Slade, I have a secret.
What's that?
I think just about anything these kids guessed might have been correct, because when I was a test pilot, I got a chance to fly almost 40 different kinds of jets.
44, I thought, right?
I
read that on 180 Out.
I never keep track of the numbers, but it was a lot. It was cool. It was fun.
How many hours did you put in? How many hours of flight time did you have?
I ended up with it was over 4,000. I don't know. It was a lot of hours. Fun.
That's awesome. Okay, another student question, and this is from Pinello Elementary, Miss Mock's class. How did you train to become an astronaut? And this is a two-part question. So the second part is, how long did it take? So how did you train to become an astronaut, and how long did that take?
How did I train, and how long did it take? I would have to say that, let's see, I think I was 39. How old was I when I flew in space? 40? I guess I was like 35. How old was? Anyways, the whole time before I flew in space, I was training to fly in space when I was at school, when I was in first grade, second grade, all that. A lot of what you need to be a successful astronaut, you learn while you're in school. And then as a pilot in the Air Force, I learned a lot more about flying airplanes and how to study systems and all that kind of stuff. By the time I got to NASA, Slade, I think that I knew about 3/4 of what I needed to learn to be an astronaut. And when I got to NASA, I was actually part of a 2-year program that we call Astronaut Candidate School with NASA. So I spent 2 years in kind of a formal astronaut candidate. I just got a sign from our support crew here in the palatial studios at the Discovery Center at the Space Foundation saying that I was 45 years old whenever I flew in space. Thank you, Cheryl, for that. But anyways, you got 2 years of formal astronaut candidate training, and then I spent several years supporting space missions that were flying. Now, before my actual mission, there was 9 months of real intensive mission-specific training that we did. And once again, there was a lot to learn. There wasn't a lot of time to learn it. So what can you guys do in school to teach your brains how to learn new things and learn them quickly? Like I said, all astronauts that I've ever known have struggled and worked hard at math. And all astronauts that I know also happen to be fairly quick learners, and that's what you have to have in NASA. If you can't learn things fast enough, doesn't mean you're not smart, but if you can't learn it fast enough, you don't get to fly on missions, because they'll put someone else in there that can learn stuff a little bit faster. Luckily, all of us have worked hard in math. Were we good at it? Nah, not a lot of us were really good at math, but we worked double hard at it compared to all our other subjects. All subjects are important, but we work double hard, and we study double hard in math.
Very nice. Okay, another student question from Pinello Elementary again, Miss Pratt's class. How long were you in space?
I was in space for, I think, like just a few hours short of 11 days. And it was a wonderful experience. I wish I could have, I'm not going to say I wish I could have enjoyed it more, because there's an enjoyment that comes out of really hard work when you know you're working on something really important. But sometimes I wish I'd have had some more spare time when I was in space to do stuff like, look at the Earth and stuff like that. We were real busy. Those 11 days went by just in the snap of a finger. But here are 11 of the most extraordinary days I've ever lived in this life. I can tell you that.
That's amazing. Here's another interesting question, and I'm sure everybody's dying to know this. How did it feel to be launched into space?
How did it feel? I think that question may be referring to the actual launch process when the rocket's lit. Now, I want you guys to kind of put yourself in my place. I was 45 years old. I'd been through a lot of challenges in life. I'd been through combat. I'd worked real hard in college to give myself the opportunity to be a fighter pilot. I was working a long time and real hard toward this dream. Now I'm on the launch pad, and there's 2 minutes left before liftoff. I've done all the training. I'm actually at that point the most qualified space shuttle pilot on the face of the Earth, because the training is so intense in those last few months. You actually become the best at what you're doing at that point. There's so much training. And I'm on the launch pad in the last 2 minutes, and there's 1 or 2 brain molecules that are thinking back on all the hard work that Miss Cheryl and I did to get ourselves to this point. But you know what I thought right before the rocket's lit? I thought, boy, I hope everything works, because it's an awfully complicated process. Now, the actual blast off is probably cooler than anything just about anybody will ever do. You take the best roller coaster ride, take the best fast motorcycle ride, take the coolest stuff you could do and roll those all into one, and blasting off into space. The main thing you feel, Slade, is just gobs and gobs of power, more power than you've ever felt in your life and will ever feel in your life. You're talking 7.5 million pounds of thrust, blasting you off straight up. And it's a real exciting 8.5 minute ride to orbit. Then the engines cut off, and you start floating, and you're there, you're in space. 8.5 action-packed minutes later.
Speaking of floating, and here's another 2-part question. What was weightlessness like in space? And then the other question is, does adapting to space affect people the same way?
Wow. Now, whoever asked that question needs to think of a career in space medicine. Slade, do you realize that it's possible, if Congress and the President and everybody works together on this, do you realize it's possible that we are going to have people on Mars in 11 years? Do you think about that?
I do think about that often, as a matter of fact, and it blows my mind.
It's possible. Now, it might not happen till 15 years or maybe 20 years, but it's possible it could happen in 11 years. You know what, y'all? In order to get people to Mars, we have a lot of problems to solve. I mean, I think you guys would be amazed at how little we know about spaceflight. You watch the movies and you read the books and all that kind of stuff, and you think that NASA's really awesome about space. We're not really that awesome. We have a lot of things to learn now. There's a lot of things we don't understand. the question was, how does it feel to be in 0G? The closest example I can give you is when you think back on your last roller coaster ride. Now, if it's an old school roller coaster, there's a big hill at the beginning of the roller coaster ride. You get to the top, and then there's the big drop. I want you all to think about the big drop. You remember what your stomach felt like during the big drop on that last roller coaster ride you took? Well, that's how your stomach feels 24/7 when you get to space. Because when you're in space and you're in orbit around the Earth, or you're in any kind of spaceship where there's no propulsion, there's nothing pushing you forward, you're actually falling. You're falling all the time. So that's what your stomach feels like. And as far as falling all the time, y'all need to research that and figure out why that is. It's a really cool concept. But anyways, your stomach feels like that. Now, the second part of the question is, do we all react in the same way? The answer is no. But half of all astronauts, within that first 12 to 24 hours of first getting into space, half of all astronauts actually get sick and they vomit. Luckily, we're trained to take out our vomit bags and puke into that so you don't make a mess. But our stomachs are so upset that about half of all astronauts actually get sick. Now, there's some that don't. We call it space adaptation sickness, SAS. Here's the challenge to all these schools that are out there this morning. Here's the challenge to you guys. NASA doesn't know why people get sick in space. There are people that get sick on roller coasters and carnival rides and never get sick in space. There's fighter pilots that never get sick on Earth and get sick when they go to space. We don't know why. We don't understand. Any career that you decide that you want to do probably has an application to space exploration. Culinary. If you want to go to culinary school and be the world's greatest chef, guess what, y'all? When we go to Mars, we're going to need cooks. We're going to be back to the moon probably in 5 years. And in a few years after that, we're going to have permanent colonies on the moon where people are living 24/7. We're going to need cooks. We're going to need janitors. We're going to need athletes. We're going to need artists. We're going to need novelists. We're going to need songwriters. We're going to need dancers. We're going to need everything. But we don't know how to solve these problems about living in space. And y'all can be part of this space team that moves humanity forward out into the solar system where humans belong. It wouldn't be there if it wasn't for us to go out there and learn about these places and inhabit them. But we're really, really dumb about how to do it. And that's why we need your awesome powers. And a quiz question for you guys: what can you do in school starting tonight with your homework? What can you do to turn your brains into lean, mean learning machines? There's a subject you know you're going to work double hard at. And then if you want to be the world's greatest dancer, if you want to be the first pole vaulter on the moon, to set the lunar record for pole vaults, you're going to have to be the type of person that can learn new things and learn them quickly. So you're going to work double hard at the magic subject.
Oh, that's an interesting, kind of future you pose to all of these future
it's coming.
Generators here.
It is coming, y'all, and
you want to generate new ideas.
You want to be part of it. You want to be on the space team. I hope, now Cheryl and I go all over the world, and to us humanity is all together. There are no countries, borders, and none of that. You can't see any of that from space. But one of my dreams, and one thing I know is going to happen, is that it's going to take teams of awesome young people to conquer space exploration in the solar system. I secretly dream that it's going to be American kids leading those teams. And this is the power that y'all have. You have the best schools in the world. You have the best teachers in the world. You have to work hard and give yourself the power. I'm looking so forward to, when I get even older than I am, I'm looking so forward to leaning back in my easy chair and turning on my three-dimensional television and seeing the awesome things that these kids in elementary school and middle school are going to be doing 20 to 30 years from now. I can't wait, because I know you guys can do it.
I agree, and I just get inspired sitting here listening to you
wait.
right now. All right, I've got another student question from French Elementary, Miss Herman's class. Does time move differently in space than on Earth? That's an interesting question.
Does time move differently in space than on Earth? It actually depends. The answer is, in general, yes. Time does move differently in space than it is on Earth. However, if you were in space and somehow, in terms of the universe, now this is an answer you're probably not going to understand, but in terms of the whole universe, if you were in space, did you know that Mr. Slade has a twin brother? Are you guys, are you
We're identical, yes.
Okay, so you basically popped out at the same time.
4 minutes apart.
4 minutes apart. So who's the older one?
I am, actually.
Okay, so Slade's 4 minutes older than his brother. Let's say that Slade was in space and his brother was on Earth. And Mr. Slade, when Mr. Slade was in space, in terms of the whole universe, if Mr. Slade was moving through the universe just as fast as his brother on Earth is moving through the universe, Mr. Slade, what is your brother's name again?
Trask.
Mr. Slade and Mr. Trask would actually be aging. Time would be the absolute same for them if they were both moving in a universal sense at the same speed. Now, if Mr. Slade was in orbit around the Earth going 17,500 miles an hour, and Mr. Trask was on was on Earth chilling out at his house, time would actually be moving a tiny bit slower for Mr. Slade. And if Mr. Slade at this point is 4 minutes older than his brother, but if Mr. Slade was in space going around the Earth for long enough, at some point Mr. Slade and Mr. Trask would be the exact same age.
Interesting.
Now, the only reason I can tell you that is because I had to work really, really hard at math, and it made me a very curious person, and I like to learn these kinds of things. This is what's known as the theory of relativity. And in order to understand that, you work double hard at math now, and later on you'll be able to understand and learn all the cool stuff out there. But there is a way for Mr. Trask to catch up to his brother, and they could be the same age. So time does move separately or differently when you're in space, in most cases if you're moving faster.
I'm going to call my brother Trask later today, and I'm going to tell him that. He's going to be happy. All right. There's an interesting question. What was your role on STS-109? That was your mission that you flew into space. What was your role?
Well, Slade, as you know, when I flew in space, we worked as a team. We had 7 astronauts on the mission. We had a team of dozens of the smartest people in the world, way smarter than astronauts, working in mission control to help us on our mission. And then mission control had access to thousands of the world's most awesome experts about the Hubble Space Telescope, about space flight, about the space shuttle, about all kinds of things. So you had a team of 7 on the spaceship, and you had a team of thousands back on Earth that had actually made this mission happen, including cooks and teachers and stuff like that. But anyways, on my particular mission, among the 7 astronauts, my role was as the pilot.
Okay.
And what that meant, Slade, was that I was responsible, along with the commander predominantly, but also with our flight engineer, Nancy Curry, who happens to be the world's smallest astronaut. At least she was back then. But the 3 of us were the primary flight crew, and the main job for us was to get the space shuttle into space and to get it safely back. Of course, the commander had responsibility overall for the whole mission in space. But my job as the pilot when we were in space. Now, when we were in space, and before we came back, you know, when we came back, there's a lot of piloting jobs. You actually fly the spaceship back from space and land it on Earth. So there's a lot of jobs for a pilot to do. But Slade, we were in space for almost 11 days. So what do you think the pilot did while we were in space and the spaceship wasn't really flying? It was just floating. You know what I did? I supported the rest of my crew. I supported the other 6. The most important job we had in space was our spacewalks. So our spacewalkers could go out and repair the Hubble Space Telescope. I stayed inside the whole time. I never went on a spacewalk. But guess who went and got the water when Nancy got thirsty when she was flying the robot arm? Guess who was the one that cleaned the toilet in the spaceship every single day because no one else had time to do it? Guess who was the one that went around with a vacuum cleaner every day and cleaned all the filters in the spaceship? Guess who was the one that babysat the spaceship and took care of the rest of the crew? It was the pilot. And y'all, I want to share with you something. We talked about the homework that you're going to have tonight. You're going to work double hard at math. There's another challenge. And actually, the way you respond to this particular challenge will determine whether on the space team you're going to be an astronaut or you're going to be part of the really, really smart support crew, the rocket scientists and all that support the astronauts. Now, when I was in space and I was cleaning the toilet every day, I became very thankful for the fact that my mother, when I was growing up, always made me clean the bathrooms in the house, including the toilets. And she taught me how to scrub toilets and get them clean. And when I was up there in space cleaning that toilet, which was pretty nasty, I was like, oh man, I'm glad my mom taught me how to clean toilets. Because it's a very important job on a spaceship to have a clean toilet to keep everybody from getting sick. So the challenge is, how many kids out there in the audience are going to go home tonight and go up to mom or dad or grandma or whatever, whoever your caregiver is, and say, you know what, I volunteer to be the one to clean toilets at the house. And those of you guys that just said, I'm willing to do that, you'll probably be the astronauts, because there's a lot of unpleasant things we have to do when we're working together as a team to make the whole thing go. Now, Mr. Slade, he won't tell you this, but Mr. Slade, before he started teaching, and perhaps even now, was quite an accomplished, I guess you would call extreme athlete, rock climbing expeditions, long camping and hiking trips and those kinds of things, putting himself and his brother and his team out there in the wilderness. And Mr. Slade knows that when you're working on a team, especially when you're doing things like you're in space or you're out in the wilderness, mountaintops, middle of the ocean, those types of things, when you work together as a team, there's a lot of unpleasant jobs that has to be done. And everybody who's a good team member is going to jump in and do those things, because that's what it takes to be an effective team.
Yeah, wow, great advice. I loved hearing what you just said. I hope all these students out here, you know, adhere to that advice, actually.
Of course they will. And then there were some kids that are going to go home and clean toilets tonight. Y'all are going to be the astronauts.
You know, you mentioned the Hubble, actually. What is the Hubble, and why was this mission important?
Slade, that's a great question. The Hubble Space Telescope is an observatory, a telescope that launched into space. I think it was in 1990 when it first went into space, and they had some trouble with it when it first got there. They had to do some repairs and all that kind of stuff. But the cool thing about the Hubble Space Telescope is that it was designed to be upgraded throughout its lifetime. Now, there are no other unclassified satellites that I'm aware of that are actually designed to be upgraded by astronauts on spacewalks, but the Hubble Space Telescope is. And the incredible importance of the Hubble Space Telescope is that, as a lot of kids are aware, and I would think that probably a good portion of the kids at Fountain Middle School kids are a little older, they've had a little bit more classes and a little bit more time to study and learn about this kind of stuff. But I think most kids realize that when you look at the stars at night, there's only a portion of the star's information that is actually reaching our eyes in the form of what we call visible light. Stars give off a lot more radiation besides just visible light. A lot of it falls under the category of what we call ultraviolet radiation or infrared radiation, gamma rays, X-rays, all those kinds of things. But there's a small portion of radiation that stars get off that we can actually see with our eyes. Now, the cool thing about the Hubble is that it is the type of telescope that's designed to see stars like we could see them with our own eyes if we had super powerful magnification in our eyes and could see really, really far. The Hubble does that. Not all telescopes do that. A lot of telescopes can see radio waves and infrared and all that, but the Hubble can see what we would see with our own eye. And that's why Hubble images are so beautiful. You guys that are listening, challenge number 3 when you go home tonight is get on the internet and call up the Hubble and look at some of the images that it's produced over the years. Very inspiring, very beautiful. But the Hubble, by the time we got to the Hubble in STS-109, it had been in space for 12 years. As you might imagine, some of the equipment was not only wearing out, but it was actually out of date. And we had a lot more up-to-date cameras and cool stuff that we could put into the telescope. So on STS-109, we had 5 spacewalks, and on the first 2 days, we replaced the solar panels alongside the Hubble Space Telescope. That's where the Hubble gets its electrical power. And on day number 3, there was an electrical box that we replaced. And then on day number 4, we took out an old camera and put in a new camera. Just as an example, y'all, imagine your cell phones. Imagine if your cell phones were 12 years old. They'd be worthless, right? But if you could take that 12-year-old cell phone and open it up and put in new insides and then put it back together, it would be almost as good as a brand new phone because it had new stuff inside, more up-to-date electronics and all that. So we replaced a camera. We took an old one out and put a new one in. And then on the very last day, Slade, we actually put a radiator on the outside of the telescope so it could see some of this infrared radiation that the stars give off. But it was important because the telescope was starting to wear out a little bit and some of the equipment was beginning to obsolesce. In other words, it was getting too old to be useful anymore, so we updated it.
Right, kind of like our computers down here on Earth.
Yeah.
They become obsolete after a few years.
You're darn right they do.
That's right. Wow, okay, so we've got a student question from French Elementary, Miss Graber's class. What education was required to become an astronaut?
What education was required to become an astronaut? There's no single answer to that particular question. However, NASA requires, at this time, I haven't really boned up on the latest admission requirements for NASA, but during my day, the educational requirements were a 4-year bachelor's degree. It could be in teaching, it could be in engineering, science, those types of things. However, there were so many people that wanted to be astronauts that it actually turned out that a 4-year bachelor's degree wasn't really enough to compete against everybody that wanted to be astronauts. Now, if you were a non-pilot back in my day and wanted to be a mission specialist astronaut, you're probably best off having a PhD in a technical field. Although NASA does hire a lot of medical doctors and they do hire teachers. What was that teacher's name again in classroom?
That was Miss Graber.
Miss Graber could be, y'all, in Miss Graber's class, she could be an astronaut. Tell her to apply to astronauts to NASA's Teacher in Space program. I actually knew some teachers when I was with NASA. They're the coolest astronauts ever. Make teacher apply, that'd be the coolest thing. But really what it boils down to is most of the time it's a technical type education. But there is one thing that all astronauts have in common, like I've said many times, whether they're teacher astronauts or doctor astronauts or scientists, engineers, pilots, all that, we all worked hard in math. Not all of us were good at it or liked it even, but we worked double hard at it, and it enabled our brain to learn other things better and faster, and that will give you an advantage to achieve these impossible goals that we talked about a little bit earlier in this presentation.
Thank you. I've got another great question here.
These are the best questions ever.
I agree. STEM, we heard of this acronym called STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. Now it's becoming STEAM. There's the A after the E, which is the arts. The question is, why is STEM so important?
Why is STEM? Isn't today STEM Day?
Today is STEM Day, actually.
Happy STEM Day, everybody.
Woo-hoo!
Happy STEM Day. Well, STEM is important mainly because of where we are headed in the future. More and more, as time goes on, we become a more technological society. And this is true of countries and people all over the earth. We become more technological and we need to be comfortable. Now, way back, if y'all study in your history class, and history is important so that it gives you a sense of perspective of where we're headed. But in the United States in particular, way back in the, I would say around 1920s, 1930s time frame, there was a big push, what we called literacy, a literacy push in the United States, and it became very important to get a large percentage of the United States population to learn how to read. Okay, we called it literacy. But as time has gone on and we become a more technological society, this thing called technological literacy is becoming as important as just knowing how to read. In other words, the problems that we're going to have to solve in the future will require a literacy and an understanding of technological and advanced concepts. And the more comfortable we are with engineering, with science, with math, and the creative side, the arts side of the whole STEAM acronym, the more comfortable we are with those types of situations and subjects, guess what, Slade? We're going to be all better off as a country because these problems that we have to solve, we're actually going to have a lot of people, our politicians, people all around the country are going to have a better understanding of these more advanced problems that we have, and they're going to be able to participate in the solution of these problems. Life is not as simple as it used to be. It's a lot more complex than it was during my grandparents' time, okay? And there's just new skills that we have to learn going into the 21st century. And we're already 19 years into the 21st century. There's things we have to learn, there's things we have to get good at, and it turns out that technology is a big part of that.
Okay, so I think that everybody out there in our audience can recognize this theme that I'm going to ask right now. Why do we need to practice math again?
Y'all, why do we need to practice math? Is it because we all want to be mathematicians? The answer should be no. Is it because we all want to be engineers? The answer should be no. But is it because no matter what it is that we want to do, we want to be more awesome? And we want to be able to learn about that particular subject faster and quicker? Do we want to turn our brains into lean, mean learning machines? And that's the magic that math does. There's other ways to do that, foreign languages, music, things like that. But as far as I'm concerned, math is the gold standard. And we don't work hard at math to become mathematicians. We work hard at math to give ourselves power. And everybody wants power. Everybody's awesome. But you'll never be able to realize your full awesomeness unless you couple that awesomeness with power. And that's what math gives you.
Okay, one last student question. This is from Webster Elementary, Miss Heinzman's class. What is your job when you are not on a mission? So I think this question is basically asking, what is your job now that you're not on this mission anymore and you're a retired astronaut?
Right. Well, let me answer real quick. I know we're running out of time, but real quick, while I was with NASA for 8.5 years, and I told you I flew in space for 11 days. That doesn't sound very fair, does it? Well, maybe it doesn't sound fair, but I had a wonderful time at NASA. You know why? The time that I wasn't flying in space, if I wasn't training specifically for my mission, or maybe that first 2 years of astronaut candidate training, you know what I was doing? I was supporting my friends that were flying in space. And I was part of that dream. I was part of that exploration team. I was just happy to be on the team. I was supporting those that were doing the rock star stuff, the ones that were flying in space. And then when I flew in space, my friends were supporting me. It was my 11 days to be the rock star. We were all working together as a big team. Now, what do we do now? The short answer is what we do now, Slade, is Miss Cheryl and I get to do whatever we want to do. We get to ride motorcycles all over the United States and talk to kids. We get to go all over the world and talk to kids in schools all over the world. And I like to share with them the coolness of what it was like to be in space, but more importantly, I like to share with them the secret that I learned the hard way, that all of the kids we talk to can have a lot of power coupled with their awesomeness by working double hard in the magic subject. And that's what we do nowadays, is a lot of educational outreach, and we love talking to kids, because 30 years from now, y'all are going to be running this place. And I love America, I love the human species, I love the earth, and I want it to be super duper even more awesome in the future, and that's on you guys. You guys are going to be the ones to do it.
Well, thank you very much, and we love partnering with you and your wife with 180 Out and going out and inspiring students all over the place. And it's just been a pleasure to have you here. Everybody, this is Lieutenant Colonel Dwayne Digger-Carey. I want to thank you for coming and having this conversation with me.
Yeah, shout out to Space Foundation. Come down and visit us at the Discovery Center. Who knows, Miss Cheryl and I might be walking around on the floor.
And I also want to thank our sponsor, the United States Air Force Academy Endowment Fund. Don't forget to check out a lot of the Space Foundation programs. We have a teacher liaison program for all the teachers who would like to be affiliated with the Space Foundation and be our ambassadors in the classroom and infuse STEM and STEAM in their classroom and framed through space. We have some upcoming virtual professional development opportunities. We have the Colorado Space Grant, and that is a professional development opportunity, and that's going to be taking place on November 16th. And we also have a Harris professional development opportunity on December 7th. Don't forget to check out our virtual programming as well. We have these things called lunch bites, which are mini lessons. So if you're very busy in your classroom and you want to get a quick idea of something that we present to you via online, then you could infuse this into your classroom. We also offer webinars, live webinars. So don't forget to complete the survey that will be emailed to you later today. But everybody, thank you for joining us this morning. Lieutenant Colonel Dwayne Digger-Carey, it's been a great pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thanks, Slade. You know, it's during during this time, Slade, when you should, you should take your cards and, you know how you always see on the news, I assume we're still being piped.
Something like
I want
this.
to complete, right?
Yeah,
I do
you know how
hit-
they always do.
Back.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit complete.
And then we
Okay.
can lip sync some inane conversation. Laughter.
We-
Oh, what?
Yeah, I think Ron's still doing.
Oh, well,
It's okay.
it's humor. It's
Yeah,
behind the
this is
scenes.
behind the scenes,
Yeah,
exactly.
Behind the scenes.
I thought that went fantastic.
How do I end it?